So the Bible uses the term prophet, except it doesn't. Actually, the Bible uses the term navi in Hebrew. And when they came to translate the Bible from Hebrew into Greek, they had no idea what to do with this word. I mean, everybody knows what a prophet is, but trying to define it, it's a problem. It's like love. So they chose the word prophetes in Greek, which means somebody who speaks in front of, speaks before. And that means essentially somebody who stands up and speaks in front of a group of people. Although if you choose to interpret the before chronologically, it's someone who speaks before an event. And that's where the idea of predictive prophecy comes in. But essentially, that wasn't a translation. That was more, well, this is how we're going to understand the term. The translation of Navi probably is something like somebody who has a calling, somebody who has a vocation. What we would call a passive participle from the root nun bet aleph, which means to call, but it doesn't exist as to call in Hebrew, so we get that from another language. So to what are they called? And really at that point, we have to look at what they do rather than the word to try and work out what a prophet is. And even then, it's very complicated because there's surprisingly little consistency. Some prophets, like Isaiah, were probably royal. They wandered the palace at will, free to do that as much as they wanted, whereas others were shepherds. Or you have prophets who are able, again, Isaiah, to recite wonderful poetic passages in Hebrew. The majesty of these passages is... And then you come to somebody like Elijah, who probably the most he ever said was, "It is you that troubles Israel." It's like saying, what is an actor? And on the one hand, you've got Laurence Olivier, and on the other hand, you've got Sylvester Stallone. And how do you deal with that? We got the same with Elijah and Isaiah. So looking at the way they spoke or the way they wrote or their actions or looking at their backgrounds, you find nothing which unifies them. So really, what is a prophet is surprisingly complex to answer. I would suggest the answer is somebody who is called by God, hence the meaning of Navi, somebody who is called by God to bring the people of God back to the covenant. Prophets are Torah enthusiasts. They are zealous for the Torah. And when they see the covenant people not living according to the covenant, they go out and they call the people back to the covenant. When they look at the history of their nation, they don't see everything in secular terms. You don't lose a battle because the opposing army had more soldiers or were better trained or better armed. You lost the battle because your nation was not keeping Torah. And when you win a battle, it's not because you were superior or better trained or better armed or braver. No, you won that battle because you're keeping Torah, and therefore God has blessed you. And so the nation is essentially being called back to Torah all the time. And the prophets are interpreting history, and they are speaking to the present all about Torah. It's all about the covenant. So one thing we do see in the Bible is that prophets started to get together. Sometimes we see this implied. You can look at somebody like Jeremiah and somebody like Habakkuk, and you read the two together, and there's a remarkable accordance between the two. We know they're both at Jerusalem, alive and ministering as prophets at the same time. So it's not surprising that they probably were part of the same group. Sometimes you see a reference to a company or school of prophets. We see this with Elisha. We see this before with Saul. Hence the proverb, is Saul also among the prophets, etc. You see this really, really well in the book of Jeremiah, where he has an assistant called Baruch who writes the book for him. And you see this in Isaiah. It's very much implied in the book of Isaiah, where the first 6 chapters of the book of Isaiah, which essentially give us his call, they're an introduction to the book. They are not chronological. The first early chapters of the book of Isaiah are a thematic introduction to the whole book. and the chronology comes in later in the book. And so one of the questions we ask is, who wrote that? Probably not Isaiah. These are prophecies made by Isaiah, but they've been edited together by his disciples. And they've been edited together to give us a taste of what the rest of the book contains. So, yeah, that there were in antiquity, in the ancient Jewish nation, there were groups of prophets, but that makes sense. People tend to form alliances with people who have the same sympathetic views. Preaching today, when you open up the Bible, you can either just explain what it says, which is what I would define as teaching, or you can speak in a way which is more obviously relevant to issues which the church is dealing with, knowingly or unknowingly. In other words, you can stand up and say, the church has got this doctrinal controversy. Let's go to the Bible and wrestle with this. Or you could say the church is dealing with this practice which there's a lot of disagreement about, and you go back and search the scriptures again. The very process of going back to the scriptures, going back to the covenant document, is essentially prophecy. So if somebody today claims to be a prophet, it's very easy to validate or invalidate their claim. Are they opening the Bible and bringing the church back to the Bible with a zeal for what the Bible says? Now, if they're doing that, even if they're doing that, then that's great, even if they're not a prophet. But essentially, that is what prophecy would be for Christians, calling God's people back to the covenant document. So today, if somebody stands up in a church and prophesies and claims to be behaving as a prophet, if they're not taking the people back to the Bible, then however much they say they're being a prophet, they're not being a prophet. A prophet is bringing the people of God back to the scriptures. So if they stand up and speak from their imaginations and it bears no resemblance at all to what the Bible says, then they can call it prophecy as much as they like, but it's not the biblical pattern of prophecy. There is Elijah, when he comes to the errant king of Israel, Ahab, and says that it's not going to rain, but at his word. He is essentially applying Torah to his current situation, because Torah says if you disobey the Torah, it will not rain.